When you're ready.
Hello, my name is Juliet, and I will be sharing my AP research project on the effects of reduced screen time in relation to concentration. Coming into this year, I knew I wanted my research to revolve around brain functions such as attention, motor control, or memory. I was also interested in studying the ramifications of recreational drugs on these functions. Lastly, I wanted to conduct an experiment using real people. So with these 3 guidelines, I dove into my research looking for possible questions and topics, but right away I realized it would be extremely difficult to find test subjects within range because no recreational drugs are legal in my state. In lieu of this realization, I discovered another mind-altering instrument that people of all ages all around the globe have access to: cell phones. The average 15 to 18-year-old adolescent spends 7.5 hours a day looking at a screen. This adds up to 52 hours over 2 full days per week spent on electronic devices, and this adds up to 113 days per year looking at a screen. This trend concerning high electronic usage can be attributed to mobile phones, which carry apps like TikTok, Messenger, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. These contain highly addictive, highly stimulating, endless streams of content which take up roughly 3 to 4 hours of the average 7.5 hours teens spend on electronics daily. A few results of excessive screen time are decreased performance monitoring, decreased response inhibition, trouble regulating aggressive behavior, struggles with resolution of conflict, and decreased attention span. Another thing I noted was that there was no data suggesting whether or not these effects can be reversed and how long it might take to do so if possible. The prevalence of these phone and technological contaminants has led to an official diagnosis. The DSM-4 has classified extreme screen usage as a disorder called Internet Addiction Disorder, also known as IAD. IAD is a, quote, compulsive impulsive spectrum disorder that involves online and or offline computer and phone usage. It is defined by 4 factors: excessive use, withdrawal, tolerance, and negative repercussions. Because the provisional daily maximum screen consumption according to the CDC is 2 hours, and adolescents spend 3 to 4 hours on average solely on social media platforms alone, majority of teens are at risk of developing this disorder. So the effect of social media platforms on adolescents has been extensively researched, and almost every finding has been negative. A study conducted by the Social Media Use in Adolescent Mental Health Cohort Study found that there is a direct correlation between time spent on social media and increased depression rates. Other effects of phone addiction can be detected through the brain through neuroimaging and various scans. A study done by the Department of Radiology found those with IAD have gray matter atrophy. Using 3T MR scanner that produced MR imaging, the researchers found that those with IAD have a decreased amount of gray matter density in areas of the brain responsible for emotional regulation responsible for modulation of emotional behavior compared to those who do not have IAD. These regions of the brain are crucial for performance monitoring, response inhibition, attentiveness, regulating aggressive behavior, resolution of conflict, implication of control, error monitoring, drive or arousal state, and motor control, meaning that those with IAD experience loss or regression of these skills. Another study done by the Behavioral and Brain Function reveals an additional discovery about the orbital frontal cortex, which is the region of the brain that acts as a reward system. With notifications, likes, comments, and endless streams of content, phones are constantly triggering dopamine releases, which is the neurotransmitter that stimulates the orbital frontal cortex. Much like drug addicts, a diminished orbital cortical thickness was found in IAD patients. This results in various cognitive impairments and dopamine deficiency. Similarly demonstrated in an additional study by the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychology, researchers found, quote, widespread reductions in FA major white matter pathways such as abnormal white matter structures that may be linked to behavioral impairments involving emotional regulation, processing, and executive attention, decision-making, and cognitive controls. The research also suggests that AID may share psychological and neural mechanisms with other types of substance addiction. So using this preliminary information, I took my own personal experience to formulate a question. Earlier this year, in July, I'd been trying to reduce my screen time, and as a result, I noticed an increase in my ability to focus, particularly while reading, which is one of my favorite pastimes. As proven in previous studies, we know that increased screen time can reduce one's ability to focus. So following this reasoning, it would stand to reason that, hypothetically, as one decreases their screen time, they could be able to focus better. This all led me to the big question. By decreasing an adolescent's screen time, can you increase their ability to focus, specifically their ability to focus while reading? So the preliminary research conducted revealed that the most effective way to track how concentrated an individual is while reading is through eye tracking technology, EEGs, and FEAs, which led me to Dr. Bulow from iEmotions, which is an advanced technology company. Through meeting with that neuroscientist and research consultant, I discovered the specific technology needed for my study was possible to be tailored to fit the design of my experiment, and Dr. Bulow had the resources and materials to design and ship them to me. Although, after the second meeting, it was made evident that there was not enough funding for my study to purchase said technology. But then, Dr. Bulow proposed the idea to count blink rate, which she said was directly linked to concentration. It was said that the less you blink, the more concentrated you are. Through deeper research, I found the effects of mild ocular surface stimulation and concentration on spontaneous blink parameters, confirming what she told me. So then I decided that counting blink rate seemed to be the best, most reliable option for my study. So with this information in mind, I could finally set up the structure of my experiment. I sent out a Google form to my whole high school looking for kids who were interested in decreasing their screen time and were willing to participate in 3 10-minute trials spanning over 6 months. Those who were willing were tasked to decrease their screen time by 1 hour every 2 months over that span. During the first trial, the participants' average screen times were recorded. They were asked to read 9 minutes of a scholarly article. The articles used in all 3 trials were the same intensity and reading level to minimize discrepancies. These participants also read 1 at a time in an isolated room to reduce distractions. While the adolescents were reading, they were also recorded so the number of blinks could be later calculated. The participants were aware that they were being filmed while reading, but did not know why. After the initial trial, the participants were asked to cut out at least 1 hour of their daily screen time average to prepare for the second trial. 2 months later, during trial 2, the same procedure was used. Once again, after the trial, the participants were asked to reduce another hour of their daily average screen time. The last trial, trial 3, occurred 2 months after the second and followed the protocol used the first 2 times. The data was collected and reviewed with a numerical correlation approach. The hope was to see each participant's blink rate decrease as their screen time decreased. A few limitations in my methodology was the very, very, very small sample size of 5 participants, and all but one of my participants was female. Another important thing to note is that at the beginning of my study, I had 13 participants, but 8 dropped out because they said they were unable and unwilling to reduce their screen time. So this is the data table that I got from the study. On the left side are the subjects, and I use letters to keep confidentiality intact. Blink trial number 1 stands for the number of times they blinked within the 9-minute reading span, and the average hour number 1 stands for their daily average screen time. So for example, subject A, during the time that they read for trial number 1, their daily average screen time was 6.5 hours. So this is trial 2 and trial 3, and then at the bottom, I did the averages of all the scores. So the data from the study yields inconclusive results. Subjects A, B, C, and D did not decrease their average screen time by at least an hour between trials as instructed. So this made it very, very difficult to decipher how, or if at all, screen time affected their blink rate. So without a constant decline in screen time, it is virtually impossible to draw a finite conclusion, since the study depended on each individual decreasing their screen time in a constant cohesive amount. So regardless of the subject's failure to reduce screen time, there was no significant correlation between blink rate and screen time between any of the individual subjects bridging from trial to trial. So for example, subject E, who was the sole participant who followed the screen time reduction process, had an increase in blink rate while their screen time decreased. So there was a recorded number of 31 blinks during the first trial, 34 in the second, and 66 in the third. So if the data aligned with the original conjecture, the subject's screen time would have decreased, not increased. So overall, there were no correlations found between screen time and blink rate anywhere in my data. So disregarding this previous analysis, there's also a multitude of possible reasons why this experiment didn't align with the predicted hypothesis. some of those reasons could be that the level of concentration cannot be increased by decreasing screen time, meaning the effect it has on the human brain is irreversible. It could be that each participant's focus was varying and attention as a whole could not be represented in this format. Or it could be something more trivial, like their eyes were drier for one of the trials, or they found one article more interesting than the other. But in my opinion, the two most feasible reasonings behind this inconclusive research was the participants' failure to comply with screen time limitations and the inaccurate assumption that blink rate can accurately represent concentration while reading. So in conclusion, the research fell short in revealing a link between blink rate and concentration while reading. So the implications of this study is that perhaps the link between blink rate and concentration needs to be studied more closely, because the research presented would suggest that the link between blink rate and attention span proposed by Dr. Bulow and the study may not be as accurate as they believe, and opens up the question, under which circumstances can blink rate measure concentration to an accurate degree? And as for the link between concentration and screen time use, there's no definite conclusion that can be made from this study. Although the data display doesn't display a clear trend linking reduced screen time to improve focus, it is still highly probable this is the case. However, the participants' inability to reduce their screen time is to be considered in and of itself. Only 1 out of the 5 subjects observed was able to reduce their screen time by an hour within the first 2 months, and 8 dropped out because they were not able to reduce their screen time at all. So this serves as proof to the claims made in the study done by behavioral and brain functions about the orbital frontal cortex that screens can be as addictive as a drug. So the research reaffirms what is said about teenagers and devices, that we are overusing them and that we don't know how to stop. So it is imperative to keep a close eye on the youth's relationship with their phones. So each year, more and more people than ever use smartphones and social media, and they're using it more and more often. So it is important that the effects of excessive screen use are researched further so that the long-term effects can be understood. So I believe that the findings from these potential studies would be important and relevant to our society, and it could even change the way that we as a society view technology. So there could be hard evidence that would allow us to put laws and regulations on cell phone usage to prevent youth from falling into this addictive dopamine cycle and prevent altercations to the brain. So the prevalence of this topic will only increase as our society keeps advancing and as we keep integrating new technology into our everyday lives. So lastly, I'd like to state that cell phones are not all bad, as they allow for easy and quick communication, they can connect us to a limited amounts of information, and they provide fun and engaging apps. But a really good question to ask yourself is, how much of your life are you willing to waste by looking at a screen? Thank you.
I'll add a clap track there.
Thank you.
A couple of questions. How did the choices you made when designing or implementing your research method impact your process?
Okay, so ultimately my choice to use blink rate to measure concentration was flawed and affected the outcome of my research. I believe if I did more research or if I conducted test trials, I might have been able to realize that it was not an effective way to measure attention while reading. So although it's unfortunate, this experience is something I can learn from and do something differently next time, and opened up the possible question of what can blink rate accurately measure in terms of concentration.
Okay, thank you. How did the limitations of your method or data influence your understanding?
Okay, so a major limitation of my study was the number of participants. 5 people are not nearly enough to collect accurate and reliable data. Another thing that influenced my new understanding was the fact that 8 people dropped out of my study. So this is a surprise to me, but it just supports the claim that phones can be as addictive as drugs, and teenagers really struggle getting off their phones.
Okay. What was the most important research skill you developed as a result of the process, and how are you going to apply it to your future endeavors?
Okay, so the most important research skill I developed as a result of this process was my ability to manage my time and space on my work. So taking what I learned from this experience, next time I perform a research project, I would set up my own calendar and personal due dates to keep me on track, because that's something I definitely struggled with and procrastinated with. So yeah, that's what I would do differently next time.